Hey guys, Owen here at Seek Outside, and today I want to show you how to seam seal trekking pole shelters. Right here we have the Seek Outside Silex. This is a shelter I'm going to be using this weekend, and we're expecting a lot of rain. Seam sealing is the process of sealing up these tiny little needle holes that are made during the sewing process. So that's where the thread is, and that's where you're going to find most leakage on any kind of shelter. Some shelters come taped, but some siliconized shelters, such as our Sil Nylon here, cannot be taped, hence why we are using seam seal. So I'm going to show you how to do this at home or like right before a trip and get it done safe and quick. So for our Sil Nylon shelters, we recommend the Gearaid Seam Grip Plus Sil. This stuff works great. You really only ever have to seam seal the shelter once and then you're done. I have a paintbrush that I bought at Walmart for super cheap, had to be like 60 cents or something, and then some scissors to cut the brush down a little bit. When seam sealing a shelter, you want to make sure that it's a not super windy day and it's not going to be dusty, or else that dust gets trapped in the seam sealant. You also want to make sure it's not going to rain and you have a few hours for the seam sealer to dry. Warmer days, the seam sealer dries quicker. Colder days, it's going to dry slower, and depending on humidity, that also changes the dry time. All right, right here I have my paintbrush and I'm going to cut it down. All I have is my Leatherman scissors right now, so just going to make use of those. What I like to do is cut it down to about half of my thumbnail, and that seems to give me the best seam sealing size. So I'm just going to cut this down. Try and get it nice and flat, no burrs like this. Make sure it's a nice clean slate so that your seams can look good for the lifetime of the shelter. So moving on to the seam sealer, you'll notice that it is not fully open. There's a little bit of an aluminum covering here. What I like to do is poke a real small hole in it. I'm talking the size of a pin there, and that's going to help you control the flow while you're seam sealing. The last item that I think is essential to getting a good seal on your shelter is a roll of paper towels. And this is really just to clean up any messes. This stuff will stick to the shelter, obviously, that's what it's designed to do. So if you miss a spot or you go a little too far, you can kind of clean that up with these paper towels. You got to hit it quick before it starts to dry, or else it'll be on your shelter like that permanently. What I like to do when seam sealing trekking pole shelters is go from the top and go down. So the first thing I start with is the ridge line and the cones for the trekking poles. So we're going to go ahead and hit that right now. Go ahead and grab the material and just run those beads real light like so. I find the longer the bead you do, the easier it is to do. Like, don't do it in small sections. Run your brush here. Again, you don't want to go too heavy. You want to just make sure that stuff's not going to drip and you're just covering that seam there. If you need some extra, just go ahead and put it on the brush itself after you ran your seam of seam seal, and boom. That is the top of your shelter. The next thing to hit is going to be your cones. Pretty much same process for the whole entire tent, right? But each section has a little bit of a different process. So again, taking the seam sealer, I'm going to run around the thread. It may be different on other trekking pole shelters, but here on this Seek Outside shelter, just going to run around the outside of that thread. There's a crack here that also is sewn. I'm going to fill that with seam sealer, and I'm just going to run this bead here. You can be pretty liberal around the cones, like you can apply quite a bit. They're definitely, you know, a highly sewn area, and so that's going to be more prone to leaking than lesser sewn areas. So like guy outs are going to be more of a leak point because there's more sewing there compared to just like a traditional seam. anywhere that has sections caught in. But there we go, we've got around the cone, and now you're gonna notice there's this D-ring. Could be different on your shelter as well, but on this seek outside here, this is sewn in. What I like to do is just apply some to my brush, bring it over here, and it's gonna soak into this gross grain here. So you can go pretty heavy. It's gonna soak in there, and then I'll apply just a little bit more. Lift this D-ring and apply it underneath. Just trying to seal all those holes there. And that's how you do the cone, so do that for both cones. All right, now that we have the top of the shelter done, we're basically just moving on to the rest of the seam points. So what I do is try and, again, run the longest bead of seam seal I can, just because this is gonna be faster. If you've never done this before, which I'm assuming you haven't because you're watching the video, you can go a little bit slower, but you're gonna run this, I like to go up because it's a little bit easier for me. And there's gonna be a little bit of a bead. Don't worry about the bead as long as it doesn't get too big. Run that up to the top of that seam. We've made it down to our guy out points here. Guy out points, like I said, that's gonna be more sewing. Therefore, it's more of a leak point. So what I'll do is I'll run my normal seam here. Making sure both stitching areas are coated. And then I just simply take a little bit, put it on my brush here, and go underneath. And you can go pretty heavy there as well. Just make sure it's not gonna drip, so just apply it thoroughly. And then that'll seal up your seams there. Coming down to these stake points, these don't really need to be seam sealed at all, and I wouldn't waste your time. It's, you know, rain is already gonna come down here anyways, so you aren't gonna have a big leak point. So I'll just finish off this seam. You can apply it there. I mean, it doesn't hurt to, but in my opinion, it's a bit of a waste of time. Specific to Seek Outside shelters, we have a patented zipperless door on a lot of our trekking pole shelters. By zipperless, I mean the door operates without a zipper, and it has this long, tight piece of cordage across it. So if you're seam sealing a Seek Outside shelter, what I recommend doing is go ahead and making sure your door is nice and tight, and it's not a windy day, of course. And then go ahead and release this cordage here. What that's gonna do is allow you to access not only this seam, but these D-rings as well, and I'll show you how to seam seal them. All right, for the zipperless doors here on this shelter, do it just like you've done all the other seams here at the top. What you want to do is, since this is also attached to the cone, go ahead and put some seam sealant nice and high up there. Run your seam down until we get to this D-ring here. Now that we're at the D-ring, I take a little bit of seam sealant, just put it on the brush. Again, you can go fairly heavy here on this gross grain because it gets soaked up here. Flip your D-ring and go ahead and coat some here on the bottom. And then continue on down the seam until you've done the rest of the D-rings and the rest of the seam. If your shelter has a stove jack, similar to this one here on the Seek Outside tent, just go ahead and do the exact same thing, running down the outside of these seams, anywhere that water could really leak in. The last thing I want to show you here is just how easy it is to clean up some seam sealer. I'm going to even show you here on my own tent. So let's say we've made a little mistake like that. Take your paper towel and do a quick rub of it off. Hit it a few times. Now you'll see that there's a little bit of residue there. The oils from your own skin will actually take most of the rest of that off. But also once you use the shelter and it gets dirty and it's been used, you won't see that residue anymore. Now that your shelter is all seam sealed, you should be good for any kind of weather that hits you, rain, sleet, or snow. If you guys have any questions, drop them down in the comments or send an email to info@seekoutside.com and we'll be happy to answer them. If you like the content you saw today, feel free to subscribe and have an amazing day.